President Kennedy has television. He understands it. He uses it. He's photogenic. His quiet intensity comes across well. In a sense, he is where he is today because of television. If Vice President Nixon had never agreed to debate Mr. Kennedy on television, it's more than likely that he, rather than President Kennedy, would now be sitting in the White House. His television news conferences have reached many millions. One of them, live and at 7 p.m., is estimated to have reached 20 million homes and 43 million viewers. It may be said that as the novelty wears off, his viewing audience will decline in size. In addition to his news conferences, he has made other appearances on television, on all three major networks. He's also made himself available, more than any of his predecessors, to newspaper reporters, the wire services, and magazine writers. Apart from the time this keeps him away from his official duties, the President rather likes to make himself this available to reporters. As a breed, he likes them. During the primary and pre-convention campaigns, it often seemed to me he was more candid with us than he was with most politicians. It even continues today. The other day, I walked into News Secretary Pierre Salinger's office to check something and found the President standing in the doorway with his coat off. He said, "Come in and sit down." We chatted for about 15 minutes. Similar things have happened to other reporters, things which have not been the rule around the White House for quite some time. The President has close friends in the Washington press corps. One reporter is in the President's most intimate circle of friends. As a general rule, the Washington press corps likes the President and is anxious to see him do well. When Vice President Nixon's supporters claimed the press was pro-Kennedy, the reporters, that is, that was right in the technical sense. It did not mean, as was charged, that they slanted their stories in Mr. Kennedy's favor and against Mr. Nixon. During the first 70 to 80 days of the Kennedy administration, the President got a good press. He and his family, especially Caroline, were and continue to be good copy and good pictures. The President is an activist as President. Restless, busy, probing, constantly on the move. Just the kind of president the bulk of the press corps thinks the country was ready for and needed. But the honeymoon, if there ever was one, is over. The bloom is off. The writing is getting more critical, more subjective. The President's program is being questioned. Where are the sacrifices he said he was going to ask of the American people? Why didn't he consider the consequences of a failure of the Cuban exiles' invasion of their homeland? The questioning at his news conferences, which had been pretty bad in the beginning, is becoming sharper. This does not seem to have bothered the President too much so far. He's getting pretty thick-skinned about criticism. He wasn't always that way, though a few newspaper columnists can raise his temper and make his language more Boston than Cambridge. Despite the new turn in his relations with the various news media, he'll continue to be the most accessible of presidents. Apart from the fact he seems to enjoy being accessible, he thinks the public has a right to know how the presidency works. He also thinks this is the best way to build his personal popularity in the country and increase support for his program. But, to lapse into jargon, some people say he's being overexposed. Says his presidential news secretary, Pierre Salinger, how can you ever overexpose the President of the United States? President Kennedy has great respect for mass media. He uses them whenever he can. There's nothing wrong in this. Every president is entitled to do it. Some simply do it better than others. Mr. Kennedy does it about as well as it has been done. Sander Van Oker, NBC, White House correspondent.
An issue in the campaign was the question of whether Mr. Kennedy, as a liberal Democrat, could get what he wanted and what he promised the people out of a Congress controlled by his own party. His scorecard on legislation and a study of his political relations with Congress by our senior congressional correspondent, Arthur Barrio.
The nation has a Democratic president. It has a Democratic majority in Congress. Yet behind the scenes, there could be more friction than there was when a Democratic Congress worked with Republican President Eisenhower. No one wants to be quoted, but it is a fact some Democratic leaders in Congress are irked by the pressure being applied by the President and his executive branch of government. Pressure to get their program through the Congress. Mr. Kennedy has sent Congress 33 legislative proposals. Not all, of course, were considered must or major, but through his messages, through appearances of his cabinet members, and in some cases by personal telephone calls, he has tried to impress upon Congress the importance of a few. Mr. Kennedy has been almost as active as was Franklin D. Roosevelt during his first term. But we don't face the same economic crises we faced in 1932, and in Congress there's been a feeling that there is no rush, so there is resentment against this pressure. Mr. Kennedy laid great emphasis on medical care for the aged, increase in the minimum wage, federal aid to education, and a plan to help depressed areas. There were 12 other priority requests. Most proposals went to appropriate Senate or House committees, and there most of them are today. In the early months of each session, most congressional work is done in committees. As a 14-year veteran of Congress, Mr. Kennedy knows this. So the progress or a lack of progress comes as no surprise to him. But his administration has put on this pressure, and in some cases, congressional leaders have raised their backs as high as that of a spitting tomcat. Not that in the final analysis the president won't get most of what he wants, but some congressional leaders, who perhaps were in Congress before some of the new frontiersmen were born, resent the newcomers trying to tell them how and when Congress should act. Capitol Hill personnel say even House Speaker Sam Rayburn is annoyed. But despite all this, gradually, day by day, the Kennedy program is gaining momentum. Congress sent to him, exactly as he wanted it, the depressed area bill providing for $394 million. He also got his anti-recession proposal to permit aid for dependent children whose fathers are unemployed. The president also saw Congress agree to his plan to increase by $2 million authority to send surplus commodities overseas. Congress also passed emergency unemployment compensation, extended the Sugar Act, and passed feed grains price supports. This is progress, but it is not a legislative landslide. The president continues to apply the pressure. He has said his domestic program will show the world its future lies in freedom for all humanity. He says this country possesses all the strength, capital, feed, educated men and women, advanced technology, and vast resources that are needed. No economic goal, he says, is too ambitious. This would seem to place the burden on Congress to follow through. Medical care for the aged hasn't gotten off the ground. Even the White House does not look for action this year. And there remain other big ones: housing, foreign aid, highway taxes, higher postal rates, to say nothing of the Peace Corps, tax revision for certain businesses, water pollution, mass transportation, airport grants, plus reforms in the administration of regulatory agencies. Few congressional members talk about civil rights. This could set the legislative program back for months. Each week, congressional leaders go to the White House. Each week, they say the president is satisfied with congressional progress. House Speaker Rayburn summed up the attitude the other day when he laughingly commented, "I think that in July, August, or September, we will have put a pretty good program through this session." This would indicate no change of pace. Art Barrio, NBC congressional correspondent.